Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. This is a weekly podcast for anyone who loves The Simpsons or ever has loved The Simpsons, hosted by two dudes that grew up on The Simpsons. This week, we are continuing our coverage of the episode Mountain of Madness. Richie the Whiz Kid and I will be covering Acts 2 and 3. Last week, if you joined us, we had author Matthew Klickstein join the show to cover the first act of the episode, as well as talk about his brand new book, Selling Nostalgia, which is available right now, online, Amazon, and all other places. Like he said, go check it out at a bookstore, support local business, and an independent artist that is a friend of the show, and we really want to encourage you to support Matthew as well as us. So thank you for joining us again this week. On the other side of this, you are going to jump into the conversation from last week, continuing with Richie and I, as the Simpsons family has joined Homer on a corporate retreat by mistake because of Homer's error. And Homer and Mr. Burns have actually been partnered up to join forces to race for their jobs. So let's go ahead and jump right back into Mountain of Madness. We open up Act 2 a little bit more pleasantly at the Mount Useful Visitors Center. I love this joke so much, so goddamn much. It's just, this is it. I'm going to declare it, even over the newsletter. This is my favorite joke. There's a big Smokey the Bear statue that's actually interactive, and Bart is interacting with it. The statue says, "Only who can prevent forest fires?" And we see Bart hit the options between you and me, and he, of course, chooses you. "You pressed you, referring to me. That is incorrect. The correct answer is you." Wow, that's so fucking stupid, but also so funny at the same time.
And I like that he asked if they could play outside away from the bear.
Back with the race, Smithers is kind of having a pity party for one. He's upset that
Marge had Maggie upside down, and I just wanted to point out, when she
yeah, you're absolutely right.
Around, because the next time we see Marge and Maggie will have her hood removed, and I feel like that was actually like a really sly little continuity thing with the animation, where like she takes the hood off them so that she doesn't do that again in the later scene.
The star bit was really funny because she's wearing like kind of the same orange star like plush jacket that she always wears in like Christmas episodes or any winter episode, I guess. So it would be very easy to hold that upside down, and that's exactly what happened. So very good catch, Rich. I really like that scene, and the fact that she's not wearing a hood later is very funny. Back with Smithers, though. Smithers is kind of having a pity party for one in this moment. He's marching through the snow by himself, griping that, how could Mr. Burns do this to him after all he's done? And he actually yells out that, "Why, if you were here, I'd kick you right in your bony old behind!" And it starts echoing through the mountains. As we cut to Mr. Burns and Homer, where Homer is following Mr. Burns, Burns actually hears this and thanks Homer for the compliments.
"I have been watching my figure." Oh.
Which I feel like that's not been an issue for Burns, like, in a while. I don't know.
I mean, we've seen him naked.
He's been pretty
I think
bony.
His behind's always been bony.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at. This is where we get the pairing, as mentioned earlier. Bart is actually like trying to hit Lisa with a branch off of a pine tree, but ends up missing and just splattering Mr. Smithers with snow. And this is kind of where we get their pair up a little bit. Lisa and Bart actually offer to help. I love that Bart's like, "I have a watch with a minute hand."
What comes after 12? 1280. Yeah, what comes after 12?
1280? No, wait. What comes after 12? Oh, 1.
No, after 12.
And then, easily my favorite interaction of characters is this next little moment between Burns and Homer, because Burns is such a smooth-ass politician in this scene in so many ways. It's almost like he convinces Homer to come up with the idea of cheating, even though it was clearly his own idea.
Yeah, it's, the Burns and Homer interaction in this episode, especially like when they're actually getting chummy in the cabin, is my favorite moment in the episode. Like, I feel the way that they feel in that moment.
But for this moment here, Burns has a little question he wants to ask Homer.
Tell me, Simpson, if an opportunity arose for taking a small shortcut, you wouldn't be adverse to taking it, would you?
Not as such.
Neither would I. I've always felt that there's far too much hysteria these days about so-called cheating.
Yeah, a lot of, hysteria.
Mm-hmm. If you can take advantage of a situation in some way, it's your duty as an American to do it. Why should the race always be to the swift or jumble or the quick-witted? Should they be allowed to win merely because of the gifts God gave them? Well, I say cheating is the gift man gives himself.
Damn it, that might be my favorite line. I don't know. Mr. Burns, I insist that we cheat.
Excellent.
And wouldn't you know, there just so happens to be a snowmobile hiding in the bush right next to him.
Horseless sleigh. So he's a cheater at golf. He's a cheater at walking up a mountain. What else is he cheating at?
Wow, you sure know how to cheat, Mr. Burns.
Yes, well, I'm older than you. You know, Simpson, you're not as objectionable as you seemed when we first met.
No, sir, I'm not.
And I don't know why, but with the line when he says, yes, well, I'm older than you, he says that and he's not rubbing it in. Like, he's genuinely just be like, well, yeah, I've got more experience because I'm older. And the way it's delivered, it just always warms my heart for some reason. I don't a weird line to warm your heart, but it was the delivery of it. It wasn't a typical Mr. Burns type delivery. And I think that's why I enjoy this episode so much, is because you genuinely feel like Homer and Burns are bonding a lot for, very few moments.
It's really fun to see the characters, like we talked about. There's a lot of unusual pairings, but
Yeah.
Homer and Burns, when they actually seem to be getting along, is really interesting.
Miles, I am in your debt.
We're not quite there yet. For now, we're back with Marge at the National Parks Visitor Center, and she's watching a very short film about John Muir. Honestly, this is just a weird thing. I don't know who John Muir is. I know that Dan Castellaneta was doing the voice because they talked about it on the commentary, but they seem to just be joking around at this point, so there wasn't really a lot of explanation for this scene. I'm sorry. It leads to, however, Marge realizing that she can't find her kids, and I love that the Ranger's first thought is, have you checked the woods?
No.
Follow me. We'll take the chairlift. It'll give us an eagle-eye view of the area directly beneath the chairlift.
It's funny because it's true.
And then immediately they get on the thing, and the Ranger continues, I won't lie to you, our chances of finding your children are slim to nil. And then immediately below them, we see the Simpsons kids playing just like they said they would be, and they were clearly only about 12 steps over a small hill. They didn't really need that eagle-eye view.
There they are. Let me down here.
Sorry, there's no way off till we get to the top. And even then, it's sort of tricky.
All right, kids. We'll meet you at the top. Just be careful.
Actually, I'm a little more concerned about us.
And the freaking bar holding the seat, like, part of it breaks.
Do you know how to weld? Back with Homer and Burns, we just leave that there, actually. It's funny, you just leave them in peril, and you don't ever actually resolve it, other than the fact that you just see that they're fine, but we don't ever actually see any more about the broken chairlift.
I wonder if that was a Marge knows how to weld.
Apparently so.
And she carries some kind of kit with her.
We cut back to Homer and Burns, who are using this horseless sleigh to get to the cabin first, and they pull up no problem, and actually talk about how they have several hours to kill, so they turn on the electricity and the gas. They find the doorknob, which of course, when properly turned, allows access to the cabin.
No going through the window for us.
There are so many silly lines like that scattered throughout the script. Like, that's another really great example of another line that is just really funny. with absolutely no context, or it's just silly and out of nowhere.
Well, maybe it's to Matt's point earlier. Maybe it's a Schwartz-Weldian thing. We don't with all the with all the rewrites, you're not sure exactly which lines were stayed from his or not, but like it does have a very Schwartz-Weldering feel to it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, there's a lot of interesting information that we just don't have about what happened on this script. I wish that we did, but it's not there as far as I can tell.
They had to pray that the rocket script was safe.
And all of the people inside
all the writers within the rocket script.
Yeah. So we once again cut back to Smithers, who's still working. Well, now he's not alone. He's got the Simpsons kid, but you can see that, I don't know that you could say they're helping, because their tracks are zigzagging all over the mountain, and Smithers is becoming concerned. He's having to tell Bart every tree that there isn't any food, no maple syrup at all in any of them, and they need to hurry because he can't be the last one to the cabin.
Hey, I'm not going to get fired. Is there any gold in this mountain?
It doesn't matter.
I'll check.
And Bart pulls out this tiny little pocket knife and starts digging at the mountain like that. Oh my god.
Just like a child would.
And then Lisa is also, and like, again, we talk about it so much, but Lisa is always at the end of the day an 8-year-old kid, even if she's got like a big heart and she's very smart and a lot of other factors, but she's 8. And in this case, she's an 8-year-old who's concerned with all the cute and fluffy animals of the forest. And she keeps finding ones that are apparently injured, because she runs up to Smithers yelling out that she found another hurt critter and she thinks it has a sprained ankle.
Twisted ankle? Aren't there any healthy animals in this forest?
Smithers is at his wit's end because he's pretty much feeling sure he's going to be fired at this point.
Well, that's all right, because Burns and Homer can get the party started.
That's true. They justify the fact that they have to wait and relax anyway, so they might as well start drinking champagne. And then this is the moment where you can really see how much these two connect on a simple level. Like, even though they're from very, very different backgrounds, they get in this really fun conversation about the pleasures of sitting. And then they kind of try to, like, almost for lack of a better word, get in a sit-off to see who can sit, like, the most comfortably. And Homer actually teaches Burns a little something about being lazy.
Well, before that, I love when Homer says that Burns is the richest guy he knows, way richer than Lenny. And Burns says, oh yes, but I'd trade it all for a little more.
To be fair, he probably has done that several times through investments, I'm guessing. How else do you get that much money?
I know, I just love that line.
That's a great line. So as they're sitting slouched into the chair, Burns actually says the only problem is having to get up.
Why get up? Here's the little move I've been tinkering with. Say I want that bowl of dip.
And there's a bowl of dip at the far end of the table, and Burns is blown away. Why, you'd have to get up, of course.
Oh?
And we see Homer start banging his foot on the table repeatedly. And the bowl, of course, starts sliding towards him, but he magically is able to pop it all the way into his lap. It was actually pretty damn impressive, if you want to think of it that way.
Dip?
Burns, admiring, is like, "Sir, I am in your debt.
Use it wisely, my friend."
Cling!
Like, that whole scene is my favorite scene.
Yeah, it's good. They're so good together.
And I love because they got the Burnsian lines in there, like just talking about how can you have a Burnsian line about sitting down? The great leveler, from the mightiest pharaoh to the lowliest peasant, who doesn't enjoy a good sit? Like, I don't know if there's another character that could make me enjoy a conversation about sitting as much as these two.
I would have to agree. It's just the way that they are able to take simple concepts and burns them up is wonderful. But unfortunately, when they clink their champagne glasses, we hear a rumbling, and lo and behold, an avalanche actually comes running down the mountain and pours over the cabin.
And then we get another Lenny and Carl bit here. Hey, did you hear something?
No.
Did I?
I don't know.
Carl's not having any of that in this episode.
No, Carl is done with Lenny all the way. We see that Mr. Burns and Homer are kind of terrified. They're huddled underneath the table, very scared, and they decide that they need to try to see if there are any ways out. So Homer goes and opens the door, which immediately fills in with snow. He closes it somehow, which shouldn't work. And then immediately walks over to the window where you can clearly see it's covered in snow, but does the exact same thing. He opens it up and then somehow manages to get it back closed again.
But
then, of course,
Isn't
he
there a
goes
way out
back
of
one
here?
more time and tries the door when Mr. Burns asks if there's any other options. So he goes door, window, back to the same door.
But I like it. He goes, I don't see one unless walks through the snow by the front door and opens it up again.
Fortunately, however, good news, there's actually a telegraph in the old cabin, and Mr. Burns knows how to use one. He starts sending an SOS, so good thing that Burns is around to, have useful knowledge. Then we actually follow the telegraph wire all the way from the buried cabin through the power lines and into the National Park Visitor Center. Unfortunately, though, it's attached to the telegraph that's being used in the museum demonstrating Morse.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, and they do this great holdout on the wax figure of Morse, who's sitting there, right over his invention. Morse code, of course.
So very, very close to getting out. And then we get more Lenny and Carl. Woo woo!
Yeah, we cut back to them one more time to see that they're using their map, and they feel like, according to the map, the cabin should be right here.
Hey, maybe there is no cabin. Maybe it's one of them metaphorical things.
Oh, yeah. Like, maybe the cabin is the place inside each of us, created by our goodwill and teamwork.
Oh. Nah, they said there'd be sandwiches.
Just a few feet below the snow under Lenny and Carl's feet, Mr. Burns and Homer are now trying to dig a tunnel through the snow. But Burns has a bit of a confession.
I'm not quite the tunnel digger I've made myself out to be.
You can supervise me.
All right, good. Let's dig. That's right. Dig some more. Oh, we'll make quite a duo. Burns and Associates. No, what am I thinking? Burns and Teammates.
At least for now, we saw how that went with the Pen Pals episode.
Well, this tunnel, like when I was a kid, I didn't think twice of it, but watching them try to dig out just terrifies me because I'm like, there's no support in that tunnel. Like, oh my gosh, if the back end like snows in, then you're just trapped. Like,
what could go wrong?
At least Homer's unbreakable.
True. Maybe not Burns, but definitely Homer will be fine. And actually, it's going really well, especially under the circumstances that you mentioned. They're just digging straight up, and somehow the snow has been supporting them, no problem. They're having very little issues, and actually, it seems like they're going to make it when they see sunlight, and they poke their heads out and immediately give each other a high five, which is just
high
enough.
Four.
Huzzah! But yes, after their high four, they cause another avalanche to come pouring down the mountain, and then they go barreling back down that same tunnel they just dug, and snow comes pouring into the cabin behind them.
Oh, so close.
And that actually brings us to the end of our second act, which means that we've got a whole nother act to go. And when we get back to it, we see that Burns and Homer are now way more scared than before. They're huddled underneath the table once more, and they're trying to talk very softly.
What happened?
And we hear, I think when we yelled, we caused another avalanche.
We should be careful not to speak unless it's absolutely, positively necessary.
Shh. You're causing more avalanches. I think they've stopped.
Let's go.
God. So they just got buried by, 12 avalanches?
My throat hurts.
Yeah, that was tough, yes. And we see that they are huddled up underneath the table again, and this time when they slowly creep out and try to open the door, it buries Burns chest deep in snow. And suddenly, teamwork is completely out the window.
Those last 3 avalanches were your fault, Simpson.
So what?
So buttons.
And this is the first sequence which we get a close-up where both Homer and Burns kind of look at each other suspiciously and squint their eyes at one another. And I will say on IMDb it points out that this is a partial reference to In a Far Country by Jack London, where two men from such different backgrounds that they have nothing in common and they soon begin to get on each other's nerves.
Uh-oh. A common problem in today's world.
But Lenny and Carl are figuring out their problems back up above the avalanche because they have made it to a cabin. So they decide it must be the cabin, even though inside there's nothing but a desk and a chair with a fireplace with a moose head above it.
Well, we made it here first. All thanks to teamwork.
Yeah, my teamwork. Back with Burns and Homer, we see that they are aware that they might go a little bit nutty if they don't find a way to entertain themselves. So they decide that with no books, no radio, and no board games, plus the only Bazooka Joe comic was one that they already read, or that Burns already read 75 years ago.
He reads it instantaneously, too. Like, he looks at it immediately, throws it to the side. I read this one 75 years ago. He can't remember Homer's name, but he can remember Bazooka Joe.
Actually, since you bring it up, it's funny that he's able to remember Homer so vividly in this episode. I guess when you're forced to be teammates. But
yeah.
For the time being, Homer suggests that they could build snowmen.
No, I have a better idea. We could build real men out of snow.
Oh, okay. And this is where you can kind of see that Homer might be a little bit suspicious that Burns is going mad.
He's got the mountain madness he does.
Back at the other cabin where Lenny and Carl had already arrived, we start to see everybody else is starting to show up, and they're all bundling around the fire. Lenny takes it upon himself to toss the moose head into the flames.
And it works.
Bart, Lisa, and Mr. Smithers all arrive, and Lisa is once again concerned about animal welfare. Mr. Smithers, that moose is on fire.
Fine, good, I don't care anymore.
Smithers is very pouty and upset because he at this point believes that he is the last one there and will surely be fired. But he learns that Homer and Burns still have not arrived.
They could still be out there.
One more time, back at the cabin, we see that Mr. Burns and Homer have now created identical snowmen side by side with one another.
206 bones, 50 miles of small intestine, full pouting lips. Why, this fellow is less a snowman than a god.
And again, we see at this point that Homer's looks exactly the same, so Burns is oddly proud of his work.
Ooh. We should dress them up.
Agreed. And for whatever reason, they decide in this moment that the cabin madness, which again, it's only been like a few minutes, maybe an hour at this point, but they both decide that they're going to take off their own clothes and give them to their snowmen, leaving them with just rags. Snow gods, true. Leaving them in just their underwear with like a rag for a blanket.
Well, Mr. Burns has his long johns on underneath.
True. Homer is almost naked.
Yeah. Look at them. Smug and secure in their finery, mocking us.
They're just snowmen, Mr. Burns.
Snowmen have peepers to watch for a moment of weakness, and then baff comes the knock in the head and we're down.
What do we do?
Oh, Wouldn't you like to know?
Oh my goodness. And this is, again, you can see that there's some slipping happening right here, because, yeah.
But you're starting to slightly see it in Homer a little bit, too, at this point.
Yeah, they're both kind of going a little bit cabin crazy, or whatever you would call that. Cabin fever.
Yes.
There it is. They should make a movie about that.
They're going Burns banana.
When we last left the Ranger Marge, they were off to try to find the children that we found out were perfectly safe, but we see them actually arrive at the cabin where all of the power plant employees are, and immediately the Ranger is like, "Hey, what's going on here? Who are you people? This is a lookout post. Where's Ranger McFadden?"
I was just happy to see some of the nice people.
"Quiet, you drunk. Where's Ranger McFadden?"
Right here, sir, right behind the drunk.
And Ranger McFadden is very professional and dressed correctly. It's a really funny gag because, of course, you think that he is the drunk person. But nope, he's standing directly behind the drunk.
Yeah, it was a nice little sight gag.
And this is when Mr. Smithers actually figures out that they all must be in the wrong place. Though the Ranger is like, well, that's not likely. I mean, the only other cabin is just over. And when they look out the window, all they see is snow. Well, it used to be where that big mountain of snow is standing now.
Uh-oh. And then they look at the seismographs. They can tell something's up. Look at all these avalanches. Do you think they could have buried the cabin?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. They didn't come for the Mountain Music Festival, March 14th through 18th. Cheap plug.
Can we go back to the cabin, Miles?
Again? It feels a lot of this episode has been bouncing back and forth between the search party and the cabin, which I guess makes sense, really. It's really the only story happening.
Well, there is kind of like an A and B plot within it with like Burns and Homer and then Smithers and the kids. But like literally they are mere yards apart, and yet it's having to bounce back and forth because of the snow.
Right. It's like the birthday parties where you have to be at two of them at the same time and they're in opposite parts of the, I don't know.
This is a real Mrs. Doubtfire situation.
Yeah. At some point, Homer's going to show up looking like an old lady and it's going to all fall apart.
I hope there's an episode like next week maybe where something like that happens. So for Richie, we'll go back to the undersnow of the cabin one more time, where Mr. Burns and Homer are now getting more and more intensely paranoid, staring into each other's eyes, squinting harder and harder, and they're both talking to themselves. Look at his eyes. He's trying to hypnotize me, but not in the good Las Vegas way. He's planning to jump me. Going to have to make sure he can't get me.
And we see that Burns actually reacts first. He jumps and grabs the fireplace poker, and he immediately starts declaring he can't kill me if I kill him first.
I'll kill you, you bloated museum of treachery!
You and what army? And immediately we see in Homer's mind an army of Nazi snowmen form behind Mr. Burns. But it's okay. Homer is ready to handle this fight because after all, he declares, "Stand back! I have powers. Political powers." And in this case, we see Burns now imagines Homer in his army, but Homer's army includes Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Mao, Gandhi, and Ramses.
That's a pretty good political team there.
I guess so. If you're going to have political powers, that's what you want to bring to the table.
All of the politics.
So Homer and Burns and their imaginary armies fight with one another underground in this cabin. And it looks like Burns is actually about to hit Homer in the face with a fire poker, but at the last second, Homer moves and he strikes a propane tank, which causes a crack, and then it somehow breaks at the opposite end, of which it was struck.
All that snow was hitting it, so I'm sure that I can't even give this one.
You can't justify it. And then suddenly this cabin is launched out of the snow in a jet-launched like rocket manner, and it's shooting down the mountain. I'll also point out, when we first walked up to the cabin, Burns turns on the propane tank, and the propane tank is sitting horizontally, it's parallel to the cabin wall. But then when it starts launching, it's very clearly perpendicular, sticking out the back, almost perfectly placed to launch it down the mountain.
I thought it was outside when he turned it on, too.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe it has 2 tanks. I don't know.
Yeah. Either way, if it would have blown up on the inside, they would both be really, really hot all of a sudden.
Just to say the least. Yeah, absolutely. Back at now that we know what it is, it's a lookout post. We see the ranger is starting to prepare everybody for the search party. All right, search party. Before we set out, let's take a moment to humor the children. And he bends down to Bart and Lisa. Kids, your father's gonna be just fine. Okay, everybody, put on your corpse handling gloves. We've got 2 frozen bodies buried somewhere in the mountain.
Did you hear that, Lise? Dad's gonna be just fine.
God.
Lisa's not buying it at all.
Well, the ranger did absolutely no, attempts to cover up the fact that, he's talking to the group, including Bart and Lisa, and even pointing out that he's going to humor them.
I just love how Bart, is oblivious to it, and Lisa's just like, oh my God.
Lisa actually, though, looks up and realizes that the rocket house is... Well, they don't really know what it is. They just know that a cabin is being propelled at them in a very quick manner. Homer has a wonderful little prayer as they're rocketing down the mountain.
Oh, Lord, protect this rocket house and all who dwell within the rocket house.
Smithers is actually still looking through binoculars to verify, yup, that's them all right.
We're over here, homie.
Oh no, something's wrong with its brakes. Lenny and Carl almost steal the show in their own way in this one, just with their silly little one-liners. But I do love the concept that Lenny would think that this house had brakes to begin with.
Well, I love that Marge is like, hey, steer it over here.
Yeah. But everybody clears out screaming, and it just so happens that the cabin that Burns and Homer are in just comes to a perfect stop, just mere feet before colliding with the outpost station. So everything seems all well and good, and Burns and Homer come walking out of the cabin door, not even that traumatized, and immediately Burns is actually like, well, actually, if you remember, we're in a competition, and he walks through the door, leaving everybody else to barrel through the door, Three Stooges style, and poor Lenny left on the outside.
I feel like that this isn't an adequate representation of the number of employees at the power plants.
No, not even at all. This is 12 people.
Max, yeah. I feel like a lot of people didn't make this trip, which is unfair to Lenny.
That's true. If they didn't participate, maybe their thought was, if I don't compete, I can't come in last.
Well, they didn't know that was going to be a thing until they got to the mountain, though. So Mr. Burns better fire all of them.
Fair. They should be. But at this point, only Lenny has been fired. And then we move on to see how we did, only to find that Smithers announces a new record.
Outstanding. Well, perhaps all of this has been worthwhile. Did you all learn about teamwork?
And everybody kind of mundanely just says, yeah.
In that case, nobody will be fired.
Unfortunately, though, Lenny wasn't in the cabin to get that message, because we can see him already disgruntled outside with a bottle of liquor in his hand, cursing the company and Mr. Burns. And I will also point out that this was not the first time that Lenny has been fired on this series. In fact, he was previously fired on the episode Burns Air, so I would see how he'd be a little bit frustrated.
But he somehow keeps his job week after week.
But he's yelling out at the sky, that old goat can't fire me. I'm going to give him a piece of my... Ah! And he falls through a hole in the snow. What we think is to his death, it would seem. Oh, nuts.
Apparently he's completely fine.
Yeah. You would think this would be like a traumatic, at least injury-stricken, if not death. It's a big deal, we'll say. But he's fine. Just nuts.
Well, Simpson, I must say, once you've been through something like that with a person, you never want to see that person again.
You said it, weirdo. And we get them staring at each other with squinty eyes before breaking back to. And then once again, squinty eyes to bring us to our credits and to the end of our third act. Richie, is there anything else that you or that book of yours want to say about Mountain of Madness?
Well, Miles, you kind of just stole the last thunder of the guidebook because it did want to point out the Lenny point in Burns' air, but since you knocked that one out of the park, I don't really have anything to say other than it does point out that while the rocket house was flying down the metaphorical highway there, it hits an innocent squirrel, which you can kind of see just kind of bounce off on the side, which it didn't bother me until I read it in the commentary, and then when I saw it again, I did laugh a little harder that time. But other than that, like it's weird knowing that there was a lot of writing issues with this episode. Well, I don't want to say issues because it wasn't necessarily issues, but rewrites and changing of this because you kind of alluded to it earlier. You can't tell. Like this is it feels like a very solid episode and it all fits very well together. There's a lot of great one-liners in it and I can't tell that it caused any kinds of issues if there were. So I guess that's just kudos to the whole team at The Simpsons for making it play out the way it did. But I mean, we've said it ad nauseum. I love the interactions between Homer and Burns in this episode. I wish we got more of that, but at the same time, if we did, it might cheapen stuff like this. So I guess we should just say all's well that ends well.
That's fair. I agree. I think it's interesting that we've talked a lot already just about the idea that there's so much controversy on this one. But at the end of the day, I do always get the impression that for the most part, on most episodes of The Simpsons, all of the Simpsons writers are proud to be a part of it.
Absolutely.
I will also go ahead and say just a couple of interesting things. Speaking of the cast, again, according to IMDb, at the time of this episode, it was the only episode to have the main cast with absolutely no also starring and no special guest voice credits.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so entirely done by the home team on this one, which is kind of cool. That's eight and a half seasons before they got to that point to have one. And it doesn't say if they have any additional after that, but at this point, that was the case. And also, I'll go ahead and talk about this also from IMDb. When Burns and Homer are going mad with paranoia, Mr. Burns accuses Homer of planning to kill him and using his carcass as a sled to go down the mountain. And I don't know if this foreshadowed that or if this was the inspiration for that, but just a season later, in season 9, we'll get the episode King of the Hill. And in that episode, I believe it's they're climbing Mount Everest. And Homer does pretty much just that. He rides a dead body down the mountain to safety.
A dead body that Grandpa took a bite out of at one point. I don't think that's Everest. I think it's a different mountain. But yeah, that's funny.
Some mountain that they're climbing.
Springfield rip off of Everest. But yeah, it's a good little parallel there.
Yeah, I just thought that was fun. Pretty interesting stuff. But other than that, that's going to do it for this week's Best Darn Diddly review show. Do make sure you go and check out our guest from part 1 of this episode. Matthew Klickstein's new novel, Selling Nostalgia, is available now. As he said, you can get it on Amazon, but hey, go out and support your local bookstore. Great advice on that. If that sounded like something you're interested in, I can't wait to read it. I think that sounds really fun. And Matt's always put out really good work in the past, so go ahead and get your copy of Selling Nostalgia. Check that out, and you can find and follow everything to do with Matt at MatthewKlickstein.com. Richie, we're online. Tell us about it.
I am at @thewiz_kid23. Miles is at Mr. Most Days Off. Our show, the gloriousness that is our show, is at Best Darn Diddly. That's DIDTLY. Make sure you follow us on there. It works all over social media.
Did you eat a particularly spicy peppered chili before you came on the podcast today, sir?
Gloriousness that is us.
As we mentioned earlier, next week is going to be very special, not only because we're talking about a wonderful episode in Simpsons Califragilisticexpialidocious, but we also have Simpsons writer, one of the original creators of the show, Mike Reese, joining us on next week's episode. So do make sure you come back with us again next week.
Oh, podcast gods. please protect this Rocket Podcast and all who listen to the Rocket Podcast.
And until next time, be cromulent to each other.
Hello, Best Darn Diddly listeners. It's Mike Reese. I've been writing for The Simpsons for 30 years. I ran the show in seasons 3 and 4. I created The Critic. And now I've written a book. It's called Springfield Confidential, and it is the first insider's look at The Simpsons. It's filled with secrets, scandals, and tales of censorship and celebrities. It's a great book. It's like a Simpsons episode. It's fast, it's smart, and it's packed with hundreds of jokes, some of them funny. Please buy Springfield Confidential. You can order it now on Amazon.com.